Okay, everybody, we'll be going live now, so I'll be starting recording now.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know what then. Yeah.
Right, good afternoon on this lovely day. Welcome to the Poverty Reduction PDC. First of all I know we're a bit thin on the ground today. Apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillors Lyndon Jones and Christine Richards.
And disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest.
Yes, Phil, I must declare a personal interest in item 4, Poverty Truth Commission. My wife has been appointed as one of the community business members of the commission.
Thank you, Peter. That's just personal.
Yeah, thank you.
And next is to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January, pages 1 to 3. We'll go through them. Page 1, page 2, on page 3. Minutes as a whole. Somebody move. Erica, on Ryland. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And straight on to item 4, Swansea Poverty Truth Commission. As you can remember, that we had a verbal presentation last month, and now we've got the same sort of presentation, but in the report form. So, Joe, as Anthony has deserted us.
Yeah.
This is over to you.
Right, okay. Thank you, Chair. At the last meeting, the PDC had an opportunity to meet the two facilitators, Kay Lemon and Sean Denty. So essentially, I'm just going to sort of recap on sort of what was said and give the committee a brief update. So essentially, the Poverty Truth Commission is essentially about bringing together people with lived and direct experience of poverty with people that make decisions, policymakers, and also giving them an opportunity to sort of shape some of the services in terms of what really helps, what matters to them. So it's also important, I think, to recognise that Poverty Truth Commissions, they're not owned or directed by any one organisation. So, for example, the council or another public service body doesn't actually have control of the commission, but they work very much sort of as partners in a co-productive way. The Poverty Truth Commissions, they have sort of a distinct life cycle, so that they don't sort of go on forever. They have a particular period of time with sort of a task in hand. So they come together, and a really important part is building relationships and trust in the early stages. And that's between all the commissioners, so people with lived experience of poverty, with civic and commission leaders, and with other sort of stakeholders in the community. Following that sort of coming together period, the Commission worked together to identify emerging themes and priorities, and establish their own agenda and establish what's important to them. Civic and business commissioners are then invited to join the Commission, and after that sort of basis is established, the Commission is launched publicly, so everybody knows about the Commission and their aims and who's in it. I suppose experiences of places like Leeds, who have also held Poverty Truth Commissions, they generally last for between 18 months to sort of 2 years. So they have sort of a start sort of process, and then also a very distinct sort of end process. And experiences are sort of shared along the way, and then a final report and the outcomes for individuals and organisations are shared at the end. Now, with Swansea, we're one of the first local authority areas or local areas within Swansea to have a Poverty Truth Commission, and the Startup Group was formed in 2019. At the very early stages, the Startup Group managed to secure sufficient resources for the facilitation team, and they selected a hosting organisation. Within Swansea, the Swansea Council for Voluntary Services was selected as the host organisation. And then funding has also been sourced from a variety of other partners to, manage and ensure that the sort of facilitation of the Poverty Truth Commission is established. So the facilitation team were in place from April 2020. I think it was quite unfortunate, really, that this coincided with the sort of start of the pandemic, because I think it's probably fair to say that because of the pandemic, that progress has been limited in the early stages. Because I think one of the essential stages of the Poverty Truth Commission is developing relationships and trust right at that very early stage. It's a very complex piece of engagement work, sort of trying to encourage people to open up and trust each other, and to recognise that people are sort of sharing sort of very personal experiences, but also that decision-making process. And this is ordinarily done through sort of a face-to-face basis, but because of the pandemic, the facilitation team had to use other mechanisms to engage with people, and so consequently the recruitment and the facilitation process took a bit longer than perhaps ordinarily it would have done sort of if the pandemic wasn't sort of underway. Well, I think one of the problems also was in terms of the early sort of setup stage is that whilst digital tools were available, because of the people that the facilitation team were working with, there are issues about digital exclusion. So, for example, some people didn't have the right sort of ICT equipment, or there were problems with connectivity and sort of internet connection. So the facilitation team took sort of I suppose a mixed method approach in terms of meeting people face to face when restrictions are allowed, and then also sort of encouraging people and securing resources for them to engage online when face to face meetings sort of weren't possible. So the facilitation team now are currently working with a group of 12 commissioners, and I think Peter mentioned that his wife is one of those leaders as well, and they've just started meeting regularly to sort of identify sort of their sort of emerging priorities. But I think it's fair to say that the commissioners are very diverse in terms of age, their ethnicity, their cultural background, with a wide cross-section of representation across Swansea, both in terms of where they come from geographically and also their different experiences. So some of the initial themes that they're looking at are issues such as mental health and well-being, housing and homelessness, family justice and policing, and also looking at issues like education, class, social mobility, caring responsibilities, rural and hidden poverty. Now, obviously, that's quite a lot of themes to cover within that sort of 18-month or 2-year period. But I think it was a case of trying to identify all those issues that the commissioners were interested in. And further work is planned over the next few months to try and hone in on some of those priority areas, or those that the Commission think that they can make a difference to sort of over the life cycle of the Commission. Now, although we don't know what the outcomes will be from the Poverty Truth Commission, looking at other places such as Leeds that have held Poverty Truth Commissions, we're expecting that there'll be a number of sort of beneficial outcomes for individuals and also for organisations. In terms of organisations, in terms of individuals in other places, people that have been involved in the Commission have said that they benefited in terms of developing confidence, being able to gain qualifications and go into further education or employment, or even start their own businesses. In terms of organisational benefits, it's been reported that the Poverty Truth Commissions can impact on the culture of organisations. I think really importantly as well, I think it's a chance for those people that sort of are in need of sort of public services to have a real sort of key hand in terms of deciding the policies and the types of services that they receive that they think could help themselves and other people within their community. And again, it's got important implications in terms of wider policies. So, for example, in Salford, they stopped using enforcement agents to recover debts. And they also waived the £11 charge for copies of birth certificates for homeless people, which enabled them to obtain official identification more easily. I suppose in one sense they seem quite sort of small indications or benefits in terms of policy, but in terms of the benefit it had for those particular individuals, sometimes those very small measures can have quite beneficial effects, really. So that's really a summary of where the Poverty Truth Commission is at this moment in time. And if the chair is in agreement, I think it'd be important for the facilitators to come back from time to time and update the committee on progress, and for the committee to give their ideas and feedback. So that concludes my presentation, Chair.
Thank you, John. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Really a question for Joe. In terms of the community commissioners, I should have said my wife is a civic and business commissioner, not a community business commissioner. In terms of the community representatives on the body, I know this is probably an impossible question to answer, but how representative do you understand them to be in terms of the different backgrounds from which they can? I note from previous discussions that the representatives from a variety of backgrounds, including, for example, refugee asylum seeker backgrounds, with which my wife has got a particular interest, and probably why she's been invited to join the Poverty Truth Commission. But obviously, it's very difficult there. I mean, those people, I'm sure, are very good, and I'm sure they'll do a very good job. But is there a kind of then a linkage back from those community commissioners back to the wider communities from which they come? In other words, can they report back, get feedback from those communities, and then report back into the Commission? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, if I can respond to that as best as I can, Peter. I can get a list of all the commissioners for the PDC, if that was helpful. Amy, I don't know if you're aware of all of the commissioners that have been appointed at this stage, but I'm sure there are plans in place to, ensure that they feed back to their community groups and other organisations, because I think the involvement and engagement is absolutely key to this approach. Amy, I don't know if you've got a list or if you know any more information about the list of all the commissioners.
I can't answer that, Joe, but you're right. We can find that out and certainly share it if they're willing for that information to be shared. I think what's important is they're representative of the community as opposed to representatives of the community. And I suppose that's the point. So they might feed back, but it's not like they're representing a group or an organisation.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Les?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. A couple of things. One is a comment, and I can imagine that the idea of the people trusting each other is quite a big challenge, and it's good to know that that's been recognised, because I'm sure that that's very important, particularly for anybody who's a commissioner, who this is completely a new arena for them, that they're being treated, or hopefully being treated, as an equal. Everyone around the table is equal, so it's quite a challenge, I can imagine. The other thing that I'm very pleased was listed as one of the themes is stigma. I don't know about the rest of you, but one of the things I loathe more than anything is the attitude some people have got to somebody who's not as well off as they are. So, sometimes the way people treat others simply because they haven't got much money is there is something totally abhorrent about that, when 90% of the time it's not the person's fault, it's the circumstances that they've had to put up with, and to treat them like that it's adding insult to injury. So certainly stigma, I think, is a huge issue, and I do hope the commissioners decide that that's a priority, and that they will be following that up and try and chip away at this poor equals bad, because unfortunately that's what the word means, doesn't it? You think about poor results, I can't think of any others, but the word poor is used often in an insulting manner. We've got to change that. Got to. Thank you.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Les. Raylan?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry if I missed this along the way, but I wondered if we could just review how people find out about the Truth Commission, how they get involved in it, because quite often the people who sort of self-select for this type of commission are people who are often what I think used to be called years ago usual suspects. Quite often they are people who live in a community and they are well-meaning individuals, and they put themselves forward to be on a variety of different organisations that operate in that community. But quite often they're not the people who are the most poverty stricken, the most socially excluded in the community. They are I don't know what the word is, sort of, as I say, well-meaning individuals who are looking to help out in the community, but they are often not, as I say, the socially excluded within that community. Can you just go over that a bit? How do people become commissioners, and how do we make sure that people who become commissioners and are spoken to as part of the process are the most socially excluded, etc.?
I don't know if Joe can answer that one.
Yes, yeah, sorry, Roland, I don't know in detail how the commissioners were selected, because I'm taking this report forward on behalf of Anthony, but I do know a lot of work has been put in place on the ground in terms of working with people with direct lived experience of poverty. And I know, for example, they've had to do some trauma-based work with people insofar as that maybe a couple of individuals have felt quite uncomfortable with coming forward, but have subsequently, as a result of working with the facilitation team, felt that they've reached a place where they can contribute. So I think so my impression is that they have tried to reach out to some of those more vulnerable members of the group. But again, I can go back to both Kay and Sian and get some more details for the committee to give you a further explanation of how they were recruited in detail.
Okay, thanks.
Peter, do you put it on back up then?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to reassure Ryland and others, my wife was approached. She didn't volunteer, and my understanding is that that has tended to be the selection process, if you like. I mean, my wife was selected because of her work with the refugee and asylum seeking community here in Swansea, and therefore she will provide them with a voice, but also from an organisational point of view. And I would imagine that that's probably true, certainly of the so-called business members. Obviously, I don't know how the community members that I think Ryland was probably more concerned with have actually been selected, whether they were self-selecting or whether they were approached. It'll be interesting to know. Perhaps Joe or Amy can tell us. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Ryland, Les, you still got your hands up?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I didn't mean to, but in fact I have got another point really on the same theme, that of course what's absolutely essential with the community commissioners is that they are people who have had the experience, and because if you haven't got people like that on the Poverty Truth Commission, then there's not a great deal of point looking at poverty as a Truth Commission. So I'm trusting that I know Anthony for quite some time, and I'm sure he would have been very thorough in trying to ensure that the most appropriate people from the community have been approached. So I feel reasonably reassured on that score. Thank you.
So what's the next steps with the Truth Commission? No, I think you said it's around a 2-year period.
Yes, yes.
Do we get a final report from that, and where do we go from that? It just can't draw a line in the sand, say that's the end of that.
No, I think probably the next stage will be honing in on the list of priority areas, because it was quite an extensive list, and I think within the time they've got remaining, it will probably be better for them to focus on fewer priority areas. But again, that will be very much for them to decide. So probably within the next few months, it would be when they've decided on what those priority areas are and what aspects of those topics they'd like to focus on in detail, will probably be a good time for a report back further to the PDC.
Yes, I quite agree with that, because that's the time where we could look at it on how certain things would affect the City and County Swansea.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else? No, so we'll wait now for that report, which will come back to us then, and then we'll see where we go from there. Okay, we all happy with that? Straight on to the update on community food growing policy. Joe again.
Okay, that's me again. Okay, so this is a short update on our draft community food growing policy. As the PDC may recall, this is something that we've discussed for quite a while now. So it was informed by the review of similar policies across Wales and the UK, particularly a community food growing policy in Monmouthshire, because that seems to be the only other area in Wales that had something similar to what we wanted to develop in Swansea. In addition to this review, we've also had a workshop with members of this PDC and also with community food growing experts from the third sector across Swansea about what we want the policy to achieve and what we want it to look like. Just to recap on the aims of the community food growing policy. So there are a number of sort of key aims. The first is to ensure that there is suitable and underutilised land owned by the council is made available for community food growing. Secondly, to promote opportunities for individuals and groups to grow food in local communities. Thirdly, to work with partners in the third sector to support community food growing. Fourthly, to ensure that community food growing activities on council-owned land benefits those most vulnerable to food poverty. And finally, to support the development of local food resilience and address food poverty. So those are the key aims of the draft policy. I think the stage that we're at now is how do we actually implement the community food growing policy? And being a policy officer, I went off and, to help the committee shape the policy. But we're at that stage now where we've got to consider how would we actually implement the policy before it becomes policy. And discussions with sort of colleagues and officers have suggested there's quite a lot of work that's needed to think about what that will look like. So, for example, the implementation of the policy may require resources to promote the policy. It might involve working with individuals and groups, either directly or indirectly, by signposting to partners such as CVS to deal with issues such as community asset transfer, lease arrangement, public liability insurance, and of course, importantly, constituting groups and other legal and procedural arrangements. I've also sort of had suggestions that, this implementation could require advice in terms of soil testing for land contamination, health and safety considerations, risk assessments, and importantly, consultation with local residents and partners about the proposed growing space. Now, it's not an exhaustive list of everything that needs to be considered, but I think it does sort of give an idea that there are quite a lot of things to consider before the policy is just sort of simply implemented. I think also it's clear that the community food growing policy cuts across a number of council services and teams. So there isn't a single dedicated resource or a team to support this. It could fall into part of the Tackling Poverty Service. It could fall into sort of the community resource Reed's team, community centres, Jeff Bacon's team. So really the purpose of this update is to make the committee aware of that and to suggest maybe there's a need to convene a working group of officers and members to explore how it should be implemented. Now that could be within existing resources, or it could be about identifying whether an additional resource is required to implement policy. So it's just a brief update of where we are with that particular policy. So we're ready to go with the policy, I think, as soon as we've sorted out how it's actually going to be implemented and delivered.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Okay.
Peter? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Joe, for that update. Excuse me, I've got a terrible cold. Apologies for coughing. It's not COVID. I took a test this morning. I was negative. Paragraph 3.1 really depressed me, quite honestly, because it's a whole list of hoops to jump through in order for us to move forward with a community food growing policy. I'm sure that, well, reading them, they're all perfectly valid as considerations. That's clearly the case. But what we're talking about here is what I imagine will be voluntary groups in different parts of Swansea who've identified particular green spaces and wish to try to develop some part of those green spaces as a community food growing exercise, and then to be confronted by all these problems to be overcome, it is somewhat depressing, I think, to consider. Groups wanting to go down this road are going to need help and advice, quite clearly. They're going to need legal advice, and as your report indicates, there's the issue of finance to be overcome. Now, finance, I think, may not be a problem if we could persuade ward members to use some of their future community budgets to meet the startup costs involved with community food growing projects. I wouldn't necessarily worry about the finance issue so much, but all these other considerations, the land ownership, lease arrangements, public liability insurance, and so on and so on and so on, may be prohibitive, I think, for many groups who are keen to do this sort of thing, but I'm not sure they want to have to go through all those hoops in order to be successful. I mean, I'm very strongly supportive of this. I think this is very important. It's good from a public nutrition point of view, it's good from an environmental point of view, and it's important from a public health point of view. And this is something that we do need to be doing. It's rather disappointing that, there is no finance on offer from the council to help this process along. We're not talking here about enormous sums of money, it seems to me. We're talking about a few thousands to get the thing off the ground. I mean, I note that there are a couple of officers in place to get the thing going. But I think we need, as a PDC chair, to be saying back to the council, this is something we need to be doing, and hey, we need a bit of money to help make it happen. But I'm interested to hear what others think. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Les?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight one thing that I know from experience is not as easy as it sounds, but I think it's an important issue. The Friends of group that I'm involved with set up a community food garden a few years back. And one of the things that we're not really being very successful in is actually making sure that the food we're growing benefits people that need it. And maybe whilst the policy is fine, I totally agree with it, I think when it comes to implementing it, I think it's sort of practical issues, similar in a way to what Peter said, that there are practical issues that we need to perhaps look at as well, because if we're expecting groups to take this on, we've got to give them as much support as possible. And for me, one of the main reasons of doing community food growing is to help people with food poverty. And that's more difficult than it sounds, because a lot of people won't want to take you up on it because they think, oh, it's charity, or they're too proud, or all sorts of myriad of reasons. So maybe we need to sort of think a bit more out of the box. So yes, if we had a working group, I think this is one of the issues that perhaps we need to look at. Thanks.
Yeah, Les. Yeah, I think I'd agree with you about the working group, because one thing about this group, it would iron out any humps and bumps that would jump out of you on a policy, because if it's council land, it's not as straightforward and say, here's a piece of land, off you go. There's a lot more involved, and if we could iron those out in a working group, then the policy would look much simpler to people, I think. And like I said, Peter, if members want to put some of their community fund into it, that would be entirely up to them. Yeah, but this is something now that would go onto next year, whichever the committee is and whoever the chair is, would then add that to the work programme. So are we happy that we look at a working group? Well, the next committee will look at a working group to take this forward, because it has been hanging about for a while now, I think. Yeah, are we okay with that? Yeah, fantastic. The fairness in green health is next. Joe, that's you again, and this is going to be shorter than the community food growing one.
Yes, this is just a very short update, Chair. So as you may recall, at the PDC meeting a few months ago, there was an agreement to develop a hybrid policy, because there was some discussion about whether we should continue with a standalone policy, or whether existing policies were sufficient where we didn't actually need a policy. So there was an agreement to develop a. However, we're a little bit stuck in the sense we're waiting for legal to come back and clarify what is meant by a hybrid policy. And then the next stage is then doing an integrated impact assessment, and again thinking about the implementation of that policy. And it probably would benefit from further clarification from the corporate director about the ownership as well, about where that best sits, whether that's, you know, within sort of an environmental route service or a sort of a poverty-based service. So again, I think we need those further discussions, which probably could be best through a working group, really, in terms of taking that forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. Yeah, that's the only way we can move forward in this.
I think so.
If we're waiting for other departments to come back to us, there's nothing much we can do about that. Okay, thank you very much. Before I go on to the work plan, can I just a small couple of words about the cabinet meeting which was held on the 17th of February, where I introduced the affordable credit policy. This was accepted and adopted by cabinet. The leader thanked the PDC for all their work on the policy. The cabinet member, along with myself, then thanked Anthony, Joanne and Amy for all their hard work on this policy. It's taken quite a while. And then I also took the opportunity of thanking our previous chair, Mary Sherwood, as she was involved at the outset for this. So yes, it's gone through policy, it's gone through cabinet. It's the first one since I've been chair. So I was quite chuffed, to be quite honest. So we wait for the next one now. Okay. Probably got that answer. So if we go, well, the work plan is straightforward. The next meeting will be the annual report. So we'll have that and we can make some comments on that, and hopefully then we'll have an update on the personal debt recovery policy. That is with Anthony. He was waiting for a couple of minor departments to come back to him, and then he would then go out to consultation. He didn't have to bring it back here because the consultation will take 4 weeks roughly, and then when he comes back, finishes the IIA, and then it comes to us. So we may get it before the end of our year, which is next month. Okay, that's all. Anybody else? Nobody else got their hands up? And that's all for this afternoon. You can go back out and cut the grass. Okay, thanks a lot.